Hi, this is Victor Antonio with another sales trading moment, and today I want to talk to you about a book I read called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. Now, in this book, Charles Duhigg tries to explain how habits are formed, and he talks about, one, there's always a cue. We see something, as soon as we see something, we follow a routine. Once we follow that routine, there's a reward at the end of that routine, and then the cycle continues. Let me give you an example, he gave in the book, and then I'm going to tie it back to sales because this is key. You're going to love this. Now, they did an experiment with a mouse, right? They put a mouse and they want the mouse to go into the maze and find a piece of chocolate here to the left. Now, what they do is you'll hear a clicking sound right here. The mouse hears a click. Mouse hears a click. That's the cue. And all of a sudden, this little gate opens up. The mouse will then proceed down the maze, maybe go back and forth a few times, back and forth a few times, and finally it figures it out, right? And so what they did is they monitored the brain activity of the mouse during that process at the beginning. And what they found is high levels of activity. As you can see right here, it's just a lot of activity going on. You'll see a peak here and a peak here because this was the click, right, at the gate. And this right here was when they found the chocolate, right? Found the chocolate, that was the reward. So, click, a lot of activity, trying to find it, and then the reward when they found the what? Chocolate, right? Now, after 100 times doing this experiment with the same mouse, what they found out is that the mouse just figured it out. After a while, it figures it out. It knows to go down, make a left, there's the chocolate. But then when they monitored the brain activity, here's what was interesting. There was a peak at the beginning, the click, right, the cue, gate opens, but then the brain activity just dropped. And then when it found the chocolate, the brain activity spiked again. And what Charles Duhigg was trying to tell us here is that right here, when something starts new for the first time, there's a lot of brain activity going on. Listen carefully what I just said. When you're learning something for the first time, there's a lot of brain activity. When the mouse was trying to find the chocolate, it really didn't understand its environment, didn't know what to do. So there's a lot of brain activity. But once it figured out to go down the path, go left, there's the chocolate, the brain activity died. Why? According to Charles Duhigg, it became a habit. And when it became a habit, and at this point, it was all what? At a subconscious level or unconscious level. It didn't really have to think about it. For example, you ever get in your car and then drive to work, and let's say it's a 45-minute drive, and all you remember is getting in the car, turning it on, click, but then next thing you know, you're there, and you're like, whoa, how did I get here? Because you weren't what? Really thinking about it because it had become a habit. When you first started driving, you got in the car, and there was a lot of brain activity going on. And then when you got there, boom, I'm at my destination, there's my reward. But once you got used to driving, you got in the car, and then everything was at a subconscious level, almost like autopilot, and then click, the reward is when you got there. Now, this is interesting from a sales perspective. Charles Duhigg doesn't tie it in, but I think there's a tie-in here. Here it is. When we're learning a sales process for the first time, it becomes very clunky, very clumsy, and there's a lot of brain activity because there's a lot of mechanics that we have to take care of, right? A lot of things we have to think about in order to do the sales presentation right, in order to say certain things right, in order to do the demo right. In other words, in order to follow a process, there's a lot of activity going on up here, right? So we really have to think about it. But what happens when you become very good at the sales process? Maybe you become very good at presenting. You know what to say, when to say it, how to say it, when to position something, when to ask a question, when to interact with the audience. You get the idea. Once you become very good at it, what then happens is you start the presentation, but your brain activity now is almost on what? Autopilot. Now, here's what's interesting. If you look at the area, getting a little mathematical and engineering like here, this right here now becomes what? Almost like extra microprocessing capacity in your brain. Now, this is fascinating to me because when you're first starting out, if you look at the area under here, there's not a lot of extra capacity to work with because you're so focused on the task. This is why new people have a hard time improvising, thinking on their feet. But what happens is when the process becomes a habit, the presentation becomes a habit, you know the product so well, what then happens is that it becomes what? At a subconscious level, very easy to present, which means now you have all this extra brain processing capacity to be able to answer questions, maybe read the crowd better, maybe adjust your presentation as you're going through it because you're able to think about things while you're doing the presentation. So this is my case for saying to you, you have to have a sales process. And at the beginning, it's going to feel very clumsy because you're mechanically thinking about everything you're doing. But trust me, once you become very good at it, it'll become a habit. And then all this extra mental space up here that you have right here will be used to actually adjusting the presentation and maybe looking at your audience, asking questions, and engaging them. And this is why the best of the best, when you look at the best salespeople today, they know their product so well, they know the process so well that they're able to engage, and cognitively, so to speak, cognitively, they're able to think about what they're thinking and saying and be able to read the crowd or the audience better. So by having a process, all I'm trying to show here is, at first it's difficult, but once it becomes a habit, you become very good at it, then all of a sudden you become more effective because you're able to think on your feet. And this is what the best of the best do when you really think about it. I hope this helps. Again, this comes from the book, The Power Habit by Charles Duhigg. Read it. I highly recommend it. This is Victor Antonio with another sales trading moment reminding you, selling ain't hard when you know how. Take care.